Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Super Paranormal Chronicles. Today, I am delighted to have Philip Kinsella with me. He's a psychic medium, UFO researcher, and author. So, welcome, Philip.
Hello, Lee, and thank you very much for having me on board. It's an honour. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I know we've been communicating quite a bit, and that's really good to have the fact that both of us are on the same page about exactly when we're going to meet up. So that's always a good thing.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's interesting. I think the diverse range of subjects that we're covering, you'll find with me and and many others, we're very grounded, very down to earth, and I think it's fascinating. Not just dealing with the UFO side of investigations, abductions. I'm also into the cryptids and psychic phenomena, consciousness, which fascinates me as well, because I do believe that there is a lot to be found within the subject matter of consciousness, and something, unfortunately, our system that we serve does not want to acknowledge, and certainly with varied topics. And I've always wondered why that was the case. Why there's not any acknowledgement of life after death or conscious survival or UFOs or indeed our genesis. And certainly at this point within my evolution, as we call it, like many others, I wanted the truth. I didn't want the fairy tale version. I wanted the raw details of what we're actually dealing with, and why such subject matters have been, condensed or indeed hidden.
Yeah, and I think that's you're right in what you say, and I think it may be due to the fact that people are scared of the unknown. They don't
Yeah,
want to admit something's happening just in case it's true, and this thing comes reality. And I think that's probably got a lot to do with why people don't acknowledge the fact that these subjects kind of exist, so to speak.
yeah, even more harder because of the way that humanity has been conditioned, consciously conditioned and programmed. And I think that is half the problem. Giving a simple example, we all know of the famous Roswell, New Mexico UFO crashing in 1947. I think that's one of the most famous UFO cases of all time. And now steeped in so much controversy and, legend, there's no way of differentiating between fact or fiction. But nevertheless, I myself believe something quite incredible happened there. And if the army, the Roswell army back then, had admitted that they had been in possession of a flying disc as opposed to a secret mogul weather balloon, so secret that they weren't even out looking for it, I must add there, then the things today would probably have been a lot different.
Yeah,
But this is why I think people being scared, of course, naturally, and I agree with you there, Lee, because I also believe that much of this phenomena, we're just seeing, small parts of it. When you start investigating into varied topics, you begin to realize that there's a lot more involved. And I agree with you that much of which the public will not accept or even understand, for that matter. So, I agree with what you're saying there, most definitely.
yeah. So I'm going to we're going to speak more about Roswell a little bit later, but can you tell me how you first got involved with paranormal UFO research and all those kind of lines that kind of basically formed your career?
Well, I had no wish to become an author of UFO books or an investigator, but what happened was that when I was young, I have an identical twin brother. My twin brother and I had been subjected to the sighting in broad daylight of what we would term a UFO with our maternal grandmother, but we didn't even consider it was a UFO back then. This is in 1982, and in Tatchbrook Road, Feltham, Middlesex. My grandparents lived in a big house, 3-story high house, and we used to spend our summer vacations there. And on a summer evening, a clear summer evening, this silver orb presented itself to us, right over us, which was the size of a football, no markings on it, silver, and it hung over our grandmother's head. And, positioned roughly where the second floor windows were. And we were astounded. And of course, again, stating that we didn't think this was a UFO because UFOs we understood were much larger.
Oh, for sure.
But Foo Fighters now come to mind. And so, when we asked her, what it was, she merely said, "Oh, look, the fairies have come to take a closer look at us." And we knew that she was covering something more. And then the object moved up higher to the third floor windows and then went over the house. And that was the beginning of it. And it wasn't until some years later, in 1989, when we had moved to the village of Marston Mortain, when I had what people would term as an abduction, an alien abduction. And it's far too long and far too winded for me to go through here. But let's just say the whole unfolding drama of that made me realize that UFOs, because I then started to take myself to the library after that event with our grandmother to try and do some research. There were very few books on UFOs then in the central libraries then. And most of it was about Roswell and some other bits and pieces. But it was the abduction that occurred that changed my whole concept of reality. And I then spent years trying to work out how this is possible. Was this a part of my consciousness reenacting something? Was this an alien abduction? Or was this something else? But the experiences were raw and they had left physical marks on me. And there was another researcher, Pierre Sabac, who, when I had relayed the abduction to him and he put it all together, he found similarities between what had happened in the early part of that evening with me and my brother before the onslaught of the abduction and with what happened with one of the greys, well, what the grey did afterwards. So I was also interested in how it was I was able to go through solid walls through the abduction. And this then led me forward into theoretical dynamics in terms of theory work of what we may be dealing with. So the UFOs have played a large part of my life. The last drama, and I will say drama, unfolded with proof, little proof there, and witnesses, even from the Isles of Scilly, was on the 9th of April 2016 with the emergence of three massive circular objects which were in triangular formation, which we observed. I mean, that's been written about and examined. So the psychic department really occurred when my maternal grandmother had passed with cancer. She actually communicated with me through here the actual time that she passed over. And that led me to go and see a medium. So I'm like thinking to myself, well, there's the guy that's had these UFO experiences. And now, my goodness me, he's talking to the dead. I thought my reputation, such as it was, would go down the pan. But I think it was, for me, is interesting trying to explore these multi-complex phenomena and also trying to bridge the gap between one to the other, because I think there are connections to be made there. So in a nutshell, that's how I got involved with it.
So having these experiences when you were younger, did you ever think to yourself that it was just, I know you mentioned that there was other witnesses, but did you ever think that, am I going crazy? Am I losing my
Yes.
my sense?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, when you see something like the silver orb that, they were reported back in World War II as Foo Fighters. Of course, that didn't even cross my mind, although as a child we were stunned, because when you are presented with a phenomena, or rather it presents itself to you, your concept of reality changes, and you kind of like get to the point where you're thinking, well, oh, is there something wrong with us? Are we wired differently? You get these conditions that most people have. I will say, you have the record, when I had a small stroke some years ago now, and the doctor told me what I'd had, but it didn't seem to register in my head. I remember going through that process of trying to work out what that was and how that had presented itself to me, even though there were not really that many physical, effects to it, because people tend to think that when you've had a stroke, there should be some outward sign for that, but it was all in here. So when the onslaught of the abduction happened in 1989, sure, I thought I was going mad. Sure, I broke down, and sure, I had a hard time dealing with it. But I think one of the things I wanted to discover was its reality and what they were, where they came from, why they did what they did. I still don't have those answers, but it certainly propelled me and pushed me to looking and going further down the rabbit hole. But I will tell you, did it assist me in expanding that consciousness? Did it do something to me? I couldn't tell you. But all I know is that it did me a favor, in the sense that had I not had that experience back then, I would have still been going around the wheel of the 9 to 5 job and believing everything our system tells us and not questioning anything. So yes, I did think at one point that my sanity had to be questioned, and I think that is said for many other people. Unless, of course, there's those people that have their love and light experiences every night of the week. Believe you me, I've met some of them. I don't buy into all of that because when the phenomena interacts with you on a personal level of integration or conscious integration, it is overwhelming to the senses, literally. So yes, yeah.
Yeah, because it's really interesting that you mentioned about the stroke, because I was a paramedic for like 12, 13 years in the UK before I came to Canada. And I went to a guy who allegedly had a epileptic seizure.
Mm.
And when I'm traveling with him to the hospital, I'm just obviously taking all the patient details. And he went, I didn't have an epileptic seizure. And I went, well, that's what it's recorded as. He went, no, because the guy with the white hat and the top hat and tails wasn't there. And I'm saying, excuse me? He goes, yeah, whenever I have an epileptic seizure, this guy appears in front of me and tells me that I need to lay down because I'm about to have a seizure. He goes, and he didn't appear today. So in my thoughts, I'd never had an epileptic seizure.
I understand.
Yeah, and I was like, how can I put that in my patient report form to say?
I understand where you're coming from. Absolutely, yeah. Yes.
So the fact that we've got on the subject of UFOs, I've told people time and time again that they would be extremely naive to think that we are the only people in this vast, vast, vast universe. So one of the most iconic incidents, and we've already touched on already, is the Roswell crash. So, for those that don't know, New Mexico, 1947. At what point into your research did you start looking into the Roswell crash?
Very early, actually. I think I was still 13. And I remember going to the library and doing it on a Saturday morning and then coming back about lunchtime and doing a project on it. For some people, that will seem very strange for any, 13-year-old today. But that's exactly what I did. My twin brother came along with me and he worked on a project on computers and robots, and I was doing UFO and Loch Ness Monster research. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can still see the blue folder that I had with the lined notepaper inside, and I thought I'd struck gold when I walked in there and I was reading about the Roswell case. And I think I have one of the original book that I had, not the one from the library, but the original publication somewhere in my library of that book. And of course, I don't know why I felt propelled, and you'll find this with people who have had UFO encounters, even what we would call alien intrusions, which we're still trying to work out on a theoretical level. My speciality, although I'm no expert, are the greys, because they were the ones that that had a profound effect upon me. But certainly you'll find that you have this obsession, and it reminded me of the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where one of the characters is like, making the mountain out of potato mash and then makes it out of clay. I wasn't that obsessive, but the question was always there. And I think that when you are touched by this singularity, there seems to be an overall effect that you can't leave it alone. And I think the reason for that is that the system again tells us that there are no such things as UFOs. There are no such things as aliens. And if there's any life out there, it's too far away for us to worry about. And especially coming into the subject of life after death, of course, the system that we serve prefers faith, because faith has no conviction whatsoever in terms of physical proof, and also with creation, with our creation, which is interesting. And that those are the primary three areas that I've been centering my investigations upon. And it just seems crazy, right, that this phenomena is still occurring, whether or not be a near-death experience that someone has, or a UFO encounter, or indeed an experience with a dogman or a Sasquatch, or looking into creation. You'll find that there is never any clarity. Never. It's always left in the balance. And a lot of researchers, good researchers and investigators, such as yourself, and many, I'm a minority. We're trying to dig and chip away at the truth of what's really going on here. But, it's like trying to get through a silent war. It's crazy. But it fascinates me. And I think on a personal level, the Roswell case was the first case that I actually looked into. And I think that is the same for many other ufologists, if that's what you want to call us, because it's the crowning glory of UFO research. You've got to know what the Roswell case is all about, you know?
That's yeah, and I totally agree. Sort of like, yeah, if you call yourself a UFO researcher, UFOologist, and someone mentions Roswell, and you go, "Oh, what's that?" It's sort of like, okay, that's it, you're done.
Mind you, there's been a few things that I have forgotten under pressure and on radio. I think one chap asked me about, dumb DUMBS, and as I like kind of like I lost it. It's like I didn't know. I kind of like, and then afterwards I thought, "Oh, you idiot!" So sometimes we can be forgiven that there's so much in here trying to sprout out. But yeah, it happens to all of the best of us at sometimes, you know. So.
Yeah, I think that's the same thing as walking into the kitchen and forgetting what you're going to the kitchen for. Yeah.
It's happened to all of us.
Yeah, so the Roswell can be closely connected because of the locality to Area 51. So we know, we've seen like Independence Day when they say that there's UFOs at Area 51. What's your take on that? Do you agree with that or do you disagree?
Well, there's no way of knowing. I mean, if you take the evidence as it stands, which is hardly anything, it's all hearsay. And let's just put this out there right now. Every single time that, we are or seemingly close to some kind of revelation, it never comes to fruition. I do believe myself personally that Area 51 perhaps houses, probably very deep underground and so finely secure that no one will be able to get access to it. They have alien technology. They probably have hardware, if that's what we want to call it, or the magic. But, it's hard to say. But I do believe that, these crafts, if that's what we want to call them, these UFOs, have been downed or deliberately downed by the military establishment. That much is, I do believe, is correct. Unless, of course, if these crafts are coming down, which, it's quite suspect, really. What's interesting about the Roswell case, if we go back to that, is that when the debris was discovered, sometime afterwards, after its initial crash, and a number of bodies retrieved, one that was supposed to have still been alive, the EBE that was still alive for a short period of time. The technology that we understand from that, and especially from, people like Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso, who wrote a book, The Day After Roswell. What's interesting about this, Lee, is the fact that the technology that they had salvaged was just enough for us to kind of like get our heads round on a material level, as it were. Now, that to me is highly suspect, unless, of course, the intelligences behind this wanted or laid forth this trap for us to find this material and then start to work it out for ourselves. So, one wonders whether or not these or a group of these entities have their own agenda, and especially with regards to the acceleration of our human species, which is interesting. So, that is quite suspect. If they are as alien as we imagine, then I believe that we'll still be scratching our heads to try and work out the technology involved. So, that opens up another area of speculation. But I wonder whether or not most of these entities or these beings are not assisting. I don't believe that they're assisting. I think they are perhaps steering us into a level of our own evolution, perhaps for their own means. And look what's happening now. If you look at the Greys, they seem to be, are not able to reproduce. They have no personality. They seem to be some kind of cloned or AI construct. I'm not going to go down that road with the AI construct because, people argue and tell you what they are. We don't know. We do not know.
Yeah.
But, and this is why my research back in 1996, from 1989, theorized about what the Greys could possibly represent in terms of their genus and why they're interested in us as a species that can reproduce. But look at us now and our species. We have accelerated quite quickly. And we are now, they're talking about transhumanism and individuality and all these things that slowly being a bit of a problem because the system that we serve knows that individually we can be dangerous. The Greys seem to operate as a one hive mind consciousness. There are no secrets, but humans harbor secrets. We all do. Oh, he's got a secret. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying that we all have our own minds. We think differently. So I think that this is the sad way that the humanity is being steered forward into a mechanical construct, and I believe that that also endangers the very spirit, or people call it the soul, of what we represent on that level. So, it's highly speculative, but going back to the UFO issue, and, they crash. I don't doubt the military have brought them down. Oh, you bet your bottom dollar they have. But some of them may have come down on their own, whether or not they are, as Jack Valet has stated, a gift or a trap. So we don't know. But it's funny that they don't seem to crash in hugely populated areas. It's always
Yeah.
somewhere quite remote, normally near a military facility or, out in the desert somewhere where it's hard to find. It's just kind of like, that's kind of suspect in some way. I mean, we have aircraft. We have aircrafts that sadly, God love them, do come down, but the pilots will do everything they can to ensure that the aircraft or whatever it is steered away from populated areas in their last attempt as they come down. But it's just highly suspect with these so-called UFOs.
Yeah. Because my first kind of interest in aliens and UFOs was what I was in my late teens, and I came across War of the Worlds,
Oh, yes.
H.G. Wells,
Yeah.
and then the musical version. And yeah, I've got loads of copies of different versions, and it always makes me kind of smile or grimace when you see the movies that people make into about UFOs and aliens, how most of them have humanoid characteristics. It's like we've got no idea what's out there. So how could you say that X, Y, and Z is going to come and land on our small little planet and be in the same shape as what we are? It's like it's
Yes.
just crazy.
I think that H.G. Wells was a genius. And by the way, I do love Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds with the narrator Richard
Yeah.
Burton. I do have the varied versions as well, too. But let me put it this way. I believe that within this system, our material system, the Earth, we have bipedal, we are bipedal, and this is the way that we are. So it's possible that these intelligences have infiltrated our dimension of reality by somehow adapting or bodies, as it were, to integrate in this environment. If temporarily or long term, we don't know. Or we can possibly take the hypothesis that they are actually astral projecting themselves and remote influencing from their dimension of reality. That is another question that we have to ask. And I've always been open to every form of speculation that you can possibly think of, even if there's one that I have contributed towards in terms of the other side, and of course the soul, and of course the levels of incarnation, reincarnation, and what would happen if we as a species theoretically cloned but cancelled out the spirit, which is interesting. So, that's another area. And I think a lot of people, they kind of like want to contain the UFO department into a very material box. They're coming for, I don't doubt there are beings out there on other physical planets, but a lot of what we're discovering is that these beings, whatever they are, wherever they're coming from, could possibly be interdimensional in nature, because this then calls into question, not only the construct of our universe that we're still trying to work out, but in terms of space travel. I'll make you laugh. I sat on board with some Nobel laureates and scientists, brilliant men, absolutely incredible men. I was very honored to be on there with them as one of the speakers. And they were talking about the UFO as though they were physical craft, arguing about propulsion technology. And, these men have to be commended. But I was smiling because I'm thinking, well, such minds would have found alternative ways of getting through to us, wherever that is. So I think, it's really exciting to be able to, think or at least imagine where these beings come from. People say, oh, in terms of the classic Betty and Barney Hill 1961 abduction in New Hampshire, when they were abducted by grey-like entities, and Kathy Marden, the niece, we are in touch with her. She's a wonderful, brilliant researcher. But ask yourself this question: when Betty and Barney had been abducted, and both Betty and Barney had been separated when their examinations were taking place, each separately. They believed that there was only one examiner on board the craft. Now, one of them tried to come in and prise open Betty's mouth and take her teeth out. And they were puzzled as to how Barney's teeth came out, and Betty had to explain that he wore dentures. Now, think of this, right? So Betty was also shown a star map, which the wonderful and brilliant Marjorie Fish had created from beads to try and find the star system some years later. They found the star system could possibly be in Zeta Reticuli, where these greys come from. So the question is, this must have been the first time that these greys had abducted a beautiful couple and found that one of them wore dentures. And I doubt very much if they come all the way from Zeta Reticuli to single them out. For what reason? So we have to ask the question, why it is the most bizarre nature of this reality that changes the individual. But I don't believe that the visitors, as they're known, are all what they appear to be. I think there's a lot more behind this. And certainly for Betty, as we understand it, she was excited afterwards. She was very much on board with the fact that there are other people out there. And so it changes individuals on their own level. Barney, for instance, couldn't deal with it. Sadly, he could not accept that. And you can understand that. So, we have to look at certain cases and see the bizarre nature of what was going on. And these beings are claiming they're from here or they're from there. If you go back to the 1950s and the questionable Betty and Barney Hill, absolutely, totally, I believe that happened without question. But going back into the 1950s with the Space Brothers, with certain shady characters that come forward and, were connecting with the Venetians, and we were told there was life on the moon and then on other systems, and then we discovered that there weren't. And of course, that's very odd. So, the question is, where are they all hanging out? That we're still trying to work that one out.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because obviously with space travel, you can look at a black hole that's like 4 light years away, and it will take you like over 1,000 years to get there, kind of thing.
You got it.
And that kind of like,
yeah, you got it.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. But we can't not speak about Rendlesham Forest.
Okay, yeah.
The UK version of Roswell.
Yes.
Let's call it that. So I believe you've done some research into that as well.
Yes, I spent 10 years researching there, and I'm no expert, but I will tell you that I believe that with each and every one of us, when we are, tainted or touched by this phenomena, there are certain levels of synchronicity. Now, what was very strange was that I remembered when I was a young lad, and I had picked up the national newspapers, and it said this story about, UFO, crashed in Roswell. And I remembered reading it thinking, wow. And then years later, finding myself in the heart of the Rendlesham mystery, as it were, meeting and having dinner with Colonel Charles Holt, an impeccable character, Lieutenant General Charles Holt then, of course, and with a few other of the people involved. Peter Robbins, a dear friend of mine, a brilliant UFO researcher. I'm not going to get involved with the stuff that happened with him then because, bless him, he's a very honest and impeccable character, is Peter Robbins. But we met him, and then, of course, he told us to go there, and we did, and that's when our investigation started. And we had some pretty incredible experiences there. And even meeting the original investigator and author, Brenda Butler, in the forest when I made a wish out. And people told me, did you know that she lived in Suffolk? No, I didn't. I didn't know where she was in the world, to be honest with you. But we ended up co-authoring a book called Sky Crash Throughout Time, and very different from the book that Brenda Butler, Dot Street and Jenny Randalls had co-authored and was published by Neville Spearman Limited back in 1984 called Sky Crash: A Cosmic Conspiracy. So Sky Crash Throughout Time was a book that I co-authored with Brenda, but the place itself was and still is a hotspot for bizarre paranormal UFO activity. And I wondered about these nests, these certain geographical locations around the world, and whether or not, what it was that brought this about, as it were. So, yeah, I mean, I can't believe that I was involved with that. And, but one of the things you have to be careful of is that, you have to be careful you're not treading on anyone's toes, because there are certain people who claim that Rendlesham is their property, that it's their mark. It's where they, So for me, overstepping that mark was kind of difficult. Like, I'm not an expert. I'm just me. I'm not military, anything like that. And you can't possibly have an opinion, Philip, because you're not part of this. But my argument is that we are all part of it, every single one of us. I don't care who you are, where you come from, whether or not you're rich or poor, famous or not. It matters nothing. It matters not to me. We're all important. So, yes, I got involved with that and had some pretty spectacular experiences.
And that's really cool. And it's really strange that people know that I'm from England originally. So, despite having loads of information that I can get from North America, I love going back to the homeland and speaking to people about the UK versions of what there is in North America. Like I say, and the Rendlesham Forest is a perfect example.
Oh yes,
of that for sure. So we mentioned a few minutes ago, where are these guys hanging out? Because obviously we don't see them every day. What's your theory on unidentified submersible objects? That there could be alien bases underwater.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, why not? I mean, the thing is, our planet is larger than we think, and most of the landmass isn't actually landmass, it's actually water mass. And there are levels that we can't even reach. We just, most people around the world, God love them, think that we've charted every part of the ocean. We haven't, only a small, very, very small part of it. So my understanding is that these USOs are what we call UFOs, or now UAPs. I think it's interesting because if you have something that is able to travel through space or time, if we use that word lightly, or interdimensionally, you're going to have a vessel that is kind of protected. So I believe that most of these objects will be able to travel, subterraneously or in the oceans. Why not? It's interesting because I wonder sometimes also whether or not these so-called ETs, and again, I've always said that, where they're all hanging out. That's a line that I always use. You tell me the bar that they're in, we'll go down and have a few drinks and talk about it. Have a sense of humor,
Yeah.
You need one in this crazy business, and people say it's not crazy. It is crazy in a good way. Even then you've got to be, like a puppet. No, I'm not. I'm very human. I'm very humanized. But it's interesting, and I think quite frightening, really, when you think about the fact that, you could be out there in the ocean and you see these things under the water. And a very good friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, another researcher, Paul Sinclair, up from Bempton, up West Yorkshire. And he's done a lot of research, not just on the dogman or werewolf accounts, but also light phenomena. And these UFOs in the Bempton Sea are seen glowing under the water, as well as in the air, in the sky. And he calls them USOs as well. So I believe that they could be one of the same. Indeed, I don't think there's any difference between them, because UFOs have been seen to come in and out of the ocean. And I will tell you something of interest here. I had a very good friend many years ago called Pete Castle, and he was a buff on UFOs. I mean, he loved them. Him and his wife used to live in a village up in Woolstead, and my brother and I and our friend Susan, we were known as the Scooby-Doo gang, the Rendlesham gang of the Scooby-Doo gang. We used to go up there and sit in their cabin and have coffee, and into the late hours of the night. And we'd read about UFOs, psychic phenomena. But he was in the Navy when he was a young lad, and he told me, I can't remember where it was now, but he told me, and I always believed him because he was in contact with many researchers long before the internet came along. He told me that he was on board this Navy ship, and they had all seen this UFO coming out of the ocean, and it came up and it shocked them all. And then it hovered there for a while. It was circular, had all these lights around it, and then shot off in the blink of an eye. And they were all taken down, and they were told not to talk about it. So, that was what I suppose we could consider as a USO, then turned UFO, but one of the same thing.
Because I do find it interesting now that quite a few governments, especially the USA, have actually started to acknowledge the fact that UFOs exist. And I know there's been a massive debate where people have been questioned on the fact. Is there something similar in the UK, like with regard to government, or is it still kind of hush-hush?
No, we're making no traction. We're making no grounds here. Let me explain a little bit about that. Now, I have a good friend. Well, we've all got good friends, haven't we? I suppose to this department of study, you can't help but having them. But thank God we do. Researcher after researcher, someone you can reach out to. But Nige Ross created NUFORS, which is the National UFO Reporting Service. And I had taken it upon myself to approach Parliament. Theresa May, who had been instrumental in the Gary McKinnon case. We all know about that, what happened with Gary McKinnon from the United States of America and the problems that he had got himself into because of accessing sensitive information and seeing information that he wasn't meant to see about UFOs and off-world officers and that type of thing. So I wrote to her on behalf of NUFORS to ask, look, in Parliament, let's all come together. Let's set aside our differences. Let's talk around a table, and we can get a team of people together and share information and try and work out what it is that we're dealing with in terms of UFOs. Now, I know Nick Pope, a lovely man, a gentleman, and for many long years. And he used to work for the Ministry of Defence. And I understand that, within his capacity, his work, he's not allowed to talk. You understand it. So we can't blame it all on him, But, saying to them, let's come together, let's put our heads together and work out theoretically what it is that we're dealing with and seeing if there's any ways that we can gain or make communication on some level. That was demonstrated with myself, Ronald and Susan, back on the 8th of June 1998 at Rendlesham with an operation calling Occupants, which came from the idea from Karen Carpenter's song of the same name.
Yeah.
So I wrote and sent all the details, and I got silence back. So what does that tell you? There are a lot of good people in Parliament. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of good people, but a lot of them are just out for themselves, and dare I say anything about that? I don't want to knock at the door and then get arrested.
Yeah. So we've mentioned Roswell, we've mentioned Area 51, we've mentioned Rendlesham Forest. Are there any other hotspots in the UK that are prolific for UFO sightings and experiences?
Oh, yes. I mean, I mentioned one of them, which was up in Bempton, and which is where Paul Sinclair lives. And he's very well known within the UFO encrypted circuit because this phenomena seems to not only bring on the appearance of light phenomena, but also the apparitions or the manifestations of what we would call werewolves. And he's been doing his research there. And we were up there last year, actually. We spent some time and we caught an image of something quite bizarre and strange that we didn't see while we were there, but appeared on camera afterwards. That's been analysed as an unknown. But sure, you've got Glastonbury as well, too, which is a hot spot, although more in the mind, body and spirit mind. So I believe that there are certain areas, many areas around the world. But the thing is, one of the things is that most of these areas are like cordoned off. You've got Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, and Hotspot, a nest of a hive of activity, supernatural and UFO activity. And that was all supposedly brought on by a curse by an indigenous tribe that created this Skinwalker. And whether or not the mind, as I've argued, is powerful enough to manifest a reality that becomes real is another area that that we've been exploring as well. Spelling, creating a spell, and why it is that churches then, condemned anyone who used their mind outside the box and considered them a witch or a sorcerer or a wizard and had them burned or drowned to centralize human programming on a very low level of conscious awareness. So I believe that, with these certain hotspots, they are great because if you're an investigator, you can go in and, we will be a little bit jittery, of course, that adds to the excitement. But I have to say to you that there are hotspots, and not just here in England, but all over the world. But I believe that most people do know about them. I think one author's written several books, especially in America, where you can find these hotspots literally.
Oh, yeah. Well, we are coming to the end of a fascinating podcast, and like some of the information you provide has been great. I've got one final question for you. So a few weeks ago, I interviewed a Sasquatch investigator, Bigfoot investigator, and he actually said that if he came across a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, he would not declare the location because his objective in life is to search for Bigfoot, Sasquatch, etc. And he would not reveal that location because of the threat from others that would come in and destroy
Soil it,
destroy the species, the location. So if I know you've already had your experiences, but if something happened to you tomorrow that would categorically prove the existence of ETs or UFOs, would you keep it to yourself or would you make it public?
That is a very good question. And I do respect the researcher who states for the record that he would keep that area secret. And this is important because, when people do these CE5 initiatives, we did that back in the June 1998 without realizing it was a CE5 that was created a year later by Dr. Stephen Greer. I have nothing to do with the man himself, but he did create it a year later, or gave that title, I believe. So if you have too many people doing it, it's not going to work because it's something to do with the projection of consciousness, and you'll get other people's whose minds are not on the same wavelength. It's rather like, as I said before, soiling the grounds, but also soiling the conscious intent. It has to be performed on another level entirely of conscious intent, as it were. Calling occupants, there was the three of us and we did just that. There weren't occupants, but a UFO of considerable size, but it was more of a pyramidal shaped device with a circular undercarriage under it. So I agree. I think if that happened to me tomorrow, or I was met by this, I have reported everything because people want facts. They want proof, but proof that we can't bring to the table, whatever that falls into, whether or not a few photographs that I've taken that are unknowns, or a little bit of film footage of UFOs that happened on the 9th of April that wasn't my niece's, again, unknowns, but people don't want to see it. It's like, can't accept it. They want to keep on with the fantasy and the fallacy that they're chasing the shadows, but when there's something presented, they don't want to look at it. But no, I wouldn't, because if you had found a place within the environment that brought these beings forward, or wherever they were coming from, you would not want it to be contaminated. That is important. I believe that most definitely. So yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's really weird because being a paranormal investigator,
yes,
if we went into a place and we saw a ghost or a spirit blatant right in front of you and you got evidence, it would blow the world apart. It would, every man and his dog would want to come to that location and experience the same thing. And like you say, it would destroy that environment. It would contaminate it.
Yes.
And if I was that spirit, I'd be like, well, no, stop. I'm not doing that again. Because
sacred sites. And this is the thing with a lot of these wonderful portals, as they call them. They must be untainted. And I think this is the problem where we're building and building and building. The energy of that's being changed. You go into the raw locations or these other geographical areas that is untainted. This is where you find more of the mystery or the phenomena rather than this. So I believe that once we start to trash it, all the energies are removed and it dies. So it is very important that, to keep a place away from contaminated minds and certainly from people trying to, trample on everything, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. In this day and age, we know damn well that would happen.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Philip, it's been absolutely fantastic. There was many more subjects that I wanted to talk to you about, so I would love to have you back on to talk about the werewolves and the afterlife experiences.
Oh, yes.
So if you want to come back, you'll be most welcome, because I've had a thoroughly enjoyable time on this one. But at the end of the day, I'd like to thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll see you on a podcast very soon.
And I will be delighted to come back on board, Lee, to talk more of the mysteries that elude us and continuously astound us. But thank you very much indeed. It's been wonderful.
Perfect. Thanks. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye bye.